Nyasha Harper Michon, architect, business developer, and activist, calls herself an archtivist, a term she coined for the crossover between activism and architecture. But what is activism exactly? And why does construction need activists? And how does she notice that her work has a positive impact? Well, Nyasha defined 5 types of activists, and I would like to invite you to the stage to take us with you on your pitch. You have a special microphone. We'll come back to that later, I think. Can you present us first the 5 types of activists and tell us what activism is for you?
Sure. So, can you hear me well? Yeah. So I'm an archtivist, which is the delightful blend of architect and activist. And I like to think of archtivism. If you think architecture is about building up, then archtivism is about breaking down the status quo, breaking down the walls and barriers that we have in our industry in order to build back in an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable manner. So I've come up with 5 different forms of archtivists that push the boundaries of what it means to be an architect, and that are very much a part of showing these different approaches that we need in the industry in order to tackle today's greatest global challenges. So first up is the social archtivist. The social archtivist strives for everyone's voice to be heard. It's really about seeking out and listening to and addressing people's lived experiences. So that can be through observation, participation, co-design, or involving citizen advocacy groups. And there's also a component, of course, to do with diversity within the end user groups, but also the design teams and the decision makers. So it's very much about thinking about curiosity, being curious. How does a mother with a stroller get through the city with groceries? How does an elderly person get to the market with shaded places to rest, let's say in the summer months? It's thinking about the different users of the city or of the building and incorporating that into design. So it's about taking into account the full array of the human uniqueness. So the social archtivist designs with empathy. Next up, we have the environmental archtivist, and the purpose here is really to reconcile humanity with nature. The focus is really on our planet, our well-being, and that of future generations, of course. I think it's quite clear with the fact that we're knee-deep in a climate emergency that there's very much a need for an environmental and ecological approach to our work. So it's really about reconnecting and harmoniously synchronizing the natural processes with how we live, work, and play within the city to create a more diverse, energy-savvy, resilient and healthy city. So that's the environmental archtivist who designs with nature. The circular economic archtivist is all about designing out waste and focusing on long-term value creation. So of course, with the traditional linear economy that we have, while we make this transition to circular economy, what does that mean for the building industry? So that really means keeping building materials in circulation forever, in a sense, like closing the loop. So the modus operandi here is really designing for disassembly and reuse. So it's talking about dry connections, material passports, and thinking of our buildings not as a final product in a way, but really a material bank so that we can harvest materials back from the building. It's about ensuring the future uses that extend far beyond the original lifetime of the building or the original purpose of the building, and that also helps to prevent asset depreciation. So the vision here is really to have building materials that would be migrating through a city just as people do. They would be disassembled, traded, reassembled to create new structures that meet the society's changing needs. So the circular economic archtivist designs for disassembly. Fourth is the technological archtivist, and this is all about harnessing new technologies to uncover original design solutions to today's greatest challenges. And it's not technology for technology's sake, but really thinking how this can be applied to solve other issues. The building industry is somewhat slow to catch on to to the disruptions and to the technological advances of the 21st century. But there's a lot to gain, I think, in this digital era, a lot to gain for the construction industry in general, from data integration to experimentation, enhancing testing, to modeling, etc. So this is all about taking on these different things. And the vision here is, could we think of the built environment or buildings that could continuously evolve, just like software does, and they could be updated all the time and optimized with technology in order to meet the changing demands and needs. So the technological archivist designs by harnessing new technologies. And last but not least is the entrepreneurial archivist, who explores and creates different business models and revenue streams. So here it's really thinking about the future of the architecture profession, but also the building industry at large, thinking about different ways of creating value, different ways of dealing with how we do the practice of architecture. So not going with this sort of boom and bust cycles that we see a lot in our profession, from selling time, which is mainly how we work, but actually creating value and selling the value that we do. So pushing the limits, for example, of the scalability of architecture as a product, for example, looking at different models. But another aspect that's really important is the collaboration that's much needed to look at the full value chain within the building industry. And right now, some of the different actors and stakeholders are very much siloed. And so the entrepreneurial archivist looks at creating these collaborations in order to be able to create the changes that we need within the building industry, because it's not going to happen in this siloed way that we work today. So yeah, everyone has different profiles and different strengths, and the magic, I believe, happens when we collaborate with different fellow archtivists and when we complement each other's strengths and we look at how different people are taking different issues from very different angles, and that's how we can create greater impact. So you don't need to be all five per se, but each of them is very valuable and brings a different approach, and it's much needed to address the very complex issues that we're dealing with today.
Yeah. Thank you, Nyasha, for this brief introduction, I think. Let's see the audience. I think there was a slightly relief when you said, like, you don't need to be all five. But when you are just, you can connect with one of them or you feel connected, then you can call yourself an activist, you would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think activism is really inclusive in my mind. I think that the idea is not to be exclusive and say, oh, only these people can call themselves activists. Architecture is a protected title, so you actually can't call yourself an architect unless you are really an architect and have studied and have passed and have registered, etc. But activist is for anyone to claim, so any building industry professional or enthusiast who's bringing about change in any kind of way can call themselves an activist.
Let's see if we have some activists here in the audience who thinks, hearing all this, he, she, them is an activist. Who dares to raise? I won't point to you, go to you. Are there no activists in the audience yet? Okay.
I would say there's a lot of activists. So I think if you're even just a part of these types of events and you're interested in how we create the city, you want to know more about it, you're an activist. You don't have to be, protesting in the street. That's not the idea, but just being a part of thinking about the right to the city and creating a better city for all.
Can you give an example? If it is, for example, I want to have a small, I don't know, shared garden in my neighborhood, then I can call myself an activist when I meet my neighbors, cooperate with them and make that garden, for example. Then you can contribute to designing the environments we all live in, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a feeling that the built environment is just the way that it is, and that the average person doesn't have any sort of role in creating a change in the built environment. But I think that has to change, that we must be a bit more a part of the city, and we have a say. I think everyone has a say. There's lots of things that you think aren't the way that they should be in your city or that you want to better. And I think that, embracing that, taking it on is definitely part of being an activist.
Yeah. And I can imagine that it also helps when you are working as a professional, an architect, a project developer, or well, whatever, work as a professional in the construction field or building environment. It could be some kind of toolkit to say, but I want to focus on this as well within this project. And I want to put some activism in it and contribute to the social component, for example, and increase the participation aspect in my projects. Does it, or how is the positive impact of this activism? How do you experience it? Can it be measured, or is it a toolkit, or how is it used?
I think it's really a mindset, so a way of thinking about how we design or how we create our city or the spaces around us. And therefore, it's something that we should keep in mind. As designers, you should be looking at all of these aspects, but as individuals, I think it's nicer to think also of groups coming together, people that are specialized in one aspect or who are very passionate about a circular economy are going to be much more specialized in this topic. So then it's good to have these diverse teams that then can come together and bring the most impact. So it's not about each individual being everything, being absolute generalists. I think that's not how
and
we
also
work,
from different domains, you can contribute to the building environment by making use maybe, or like put it as a label on yourself to also contribute to the building environment.
Yeah.
And the starting point was quite specific, I think. It was during your studies, right?
Yeah.
You studied in France as well.
Yeah.
A lot of influence of Le Corbusier, of course. And he has his thing, and then you thought, well, no, I think that shouldn't be the starting point. Can you explain?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's Le Corbusier is a very important architect for the modernist movement, so the 20th century. And as we go into the 21st century, what is the movement? How are we thinking? And it's a completely different way of thinking about things. The challenges that we're dealing with today are different than those 100 years back. And I was triggered by Le Corbusier's way of thinking and trying to think of the parallels of today's era. And so, for example, we have the 5 points of architecture that Le Corbusier has come up with, which are very much to do with functionality and how, or features of architecture.
User grid, focus on the facade, a roof garden.
Right,
those
exactly.
5 points.
Yeah, these 5 points, which featured very much in my education. But I was thinking more for the 21st century, the change that we need is more systemic. It's more in the way that we think about things, less in exactly what the result should be. So, you know, roof gardens or not.
So not the 5 points of architects.
But the 5 points of activism.
Yeah.
And the 5 activists that I presented at the beginning are personifications in a way of these different themes of social equity, environmental and ecological aspects, the circular economy, technological innovation, and entrepreneurial aspects. So these are, in a way, the 5 points, and it's much broader. It's much more, broad, but it's about the way that we need to work together. And I think what's interesting is that many people are already being activists and doing these different things, but it feels a bit fragmented.
And it's more on a systemic level in different domains, the domains you presented. And on the screen, we also see reference man.
Yeah.
And reference man, well, he strikes again tonight because we all have these lovely headphones, but those were too big for your head, so it was based on reference man. So it didn't fit. That's why you needed this microphone. But you saw that as well in the building environment.
Yeah, absolutely. In architecture school, you learn. So one of the aspects that Le Corbusier came up with is this modular man who, if you design for this guy, you design for everyone. This is the idea. He's about 6 foot tall, he's a white guy, he's heterosexual, he's
9 to 5 job,
he's able-bodied,
drives to his
Exactly.
work with a car.
We design for him, we design for everyone, it's perfect. But this, of course, is very far from reality. And I myself was designing for Reference Man. I was, being a good student. But I couldn't be further from Reference Man in a way. And I think it's important to have these other references. And so that was also another point of disconnect from the 20th century, which was very much on universal and exclusive design in a way. And
how can you do that in your work? You told me about, for example, change your perspective and use the concept of an 8 and 80-year-old to design for an 8 to 80-year-old. Can you explain?
For example, that's one way of thinking about it, of designing a city for, if you design for 8-year-olds or 80-year-olds, you then cover a lot of issues that many people in between sort of deal with. Of course, it's not going to, be a blanket thing that solves everything for everyone. I think one of the main things is having different people looking at different users. And then together we create this diversity of spaces and diversity of uses, and then you have a city that's perfect for everyone. Not every single space will be perfectly fitted for everyone. This is the reality. Yeah. But with this diversity of how we look at spaces, if each designer kind of looks at it from a different perspective, then we start to get a much more diverse and inclusive built environment.
And I can imagine this is part of the social activism. And you also brought an example, stalled. What do we see? It's also not a design for Reference Man, but...
this is a design for a universal or an inclusive restroom design. So it started with issues of trans people not having a place to go to the bathroom that was clear for them, and having issues of fear of assault or of being pushed out of the bathroom or whatnot. And this design starts there with solving that issue, but in the end it comes up with a lot of different aspects that creates a space that's much broader than just for trans people, let's say. It's for everyone, in the sense that they're able to design a space that doesn't say, okay, this is a handicapped toilet or this is a toilet for a woman, but this is a toilet that's low, this is one that's a bathroom that's wider. There's people who are larger, there's people who have strollers. I have 2 twins. When you have a big stroller, you need a bigger space.
So it's actually much more inclusive than just take another group of people for whom you design, but really a wider target group.
Exactly.
Or not even have a target group anymore, but...
Well, you start somewhere, and I think what's the beauty with inclusive design is that you usually end up, when you target sort of one marginalized group, you end up creating a space that's much more inclusive for many other people who weren't the intended user at the beginning, but it starts to be much more inclusive for them too. So they also find their place, and you create something that's much broader than the first intended
things
user.
You haven't even think of.
As well,
thought of. One more example maybe from the technology domain. Use AI, artificial intelligence. You already told about really static sector, really slowly, long processes. What can we do with these types of new technology?
Well, I love this example because sometimes we see a lot about technology for technology's sake. So I think projects that are maybe just about discovering what technology can do, but when it's applied to be able to solve other issues, that's when I get excited about it. So what's really great with Urbanist AI is that it's an AI platform, which I thought is nice to share because AI is a hot topic now with ChatGPT. But what it's about here is about creating a process, a participatory process of co-design, so that different stakeholders and different people can come together and start to reimagine their spaces using AI to help imagine that process. And it gives a lot more agency to people in the community, people who don't have architecture degrees, to be able to start imagining their spaces, their cities, the places all around them, and to have a tool to start visualizing that. Because I think that these processes can be quite hard when you're not trained
You can make these beautiful renders architects can make, but use artificial intelligence to also
to give a boost and to start to play with the design and start to see things. So it's quite interesting to use technology in these ways to be able to have either social gain or environmental gain, etc. So this is a nice example of technological activism and social activism.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we could talk a lot longer about this topic, but I hope this brief introduction, will spread a bit across also this audience and outside of this room, so many more people will proudly wear the label or the title of Archtivist as well.
I hope so.
How will you continue in carrying out this activism?
Yeah, I think it's just showing it and also seeing that it can be very empowering and that it can bring together, I think, professionals or enthusiasts who may think that they're looking at things in completely different ways, but in the end, we're all coming together to create impact, to create more inclusive, to create more regenerative or resilient built environment, just doing it in these different ways. But it's all part of one mindset, so I hope that it brings us more together so that then we can get to the transitions that we need faster. Yeah.
Well, I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
Good luck.
Thanks.